Honestly, the library itself can be picked up in 1 hour. The core concepts are pretty much the same as Vue itself. We have state, which are just reactive data, getters, which are computed, and actions, which are just methods compared to components. To me, after that, what someone should be focusing on should be the reactivity itself.
This is 20-Minute JavaScript, a weekly show where I, your host, interview members of the JavaScript community about all topics concerning JavaScript. The 20-Minute JavaScript show is brought to you by OpenReplay, an open source session replay platform meant for developers. If you'd like to know more, visit openreplay.com. If you'd like to be on the show or suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at the 20MinJS. Welcome to episode number 31. I'm Fernando, and today I'm going to be interviewing Eduardo San Martin Morote. He's part of the core Vue team and the creator of Pinia, the latest Vue state management library. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Pinia. What is it? When would you want to use it? And most importantly, why is it called Pinia? So without further ado, let's meet our guest. Hi Eduardo, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, thanks for having me. So yeah, my name is Eduardo. I'm a front-end developer and currently freelance. I have been doing freelancing for a few years now, and I'm more known on the Vue community for being part of the core team, and specifically the router and Pinia, which are two libraries I'm the author of. Other than that, I'm Spanish, living in France, in Paris. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Welcome to the show. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Pinia, and we're going to be tackling the name in the end. But to get started, because I'm not sure if everyone's aware of it. A lot of people maybe are still dealing with Vue 2. So can you kind of walk us through what is Pinia, and maybe also cover the reasons why building a new state management library for Vue 3 was the way to go instead of continuing the Vuex path, essentially?
Sure. So Pinia is a store library for Vue 2 and Vue 3. It's focused on the composition API, which was initially meant for Vue 3, but it was ported back to Vue 2, now completely integrated into Vue itself, starting from Vue 2.7. And it's meant to be, it wasn't meant to be a replacement for Vuex in the beginning. It just started as my own experimentation for a store system, a store library that could bring type safety to the store state management field in Vue, because Vuex wasn't type safe by itself, and it was very verbose to get type safety using decorators and other TypeScript things. So that was the main goal of Pinia, but then also having something lighter and simpler to use without the verbosity of things like mutations, which turned out to be not very liked by the community from what I was seeing, and often misused, often overused, or people were overusing getters and mutations. And so that was the main reason. I was really craving for something that was type safe and I could use myself.
All right. Interesting. And became the de facto library. That's interesting. Interesting results. So let's take a step back. And since you went through the whole process of defining your own way, essentially, in Pinia, we can see the way you think about state, more or less, because like you said, you created it because you felt the need for a specific way of dealing with it, be it type safe or whatever. Can you tell us a little bit how you see state in the context of web applications and kind of the uses for it, essentially, without going all the way to use it for everything and overuse the state? But how do you see it fitting within web development? Yeah.
My personal point of view is not to use Pinia too much, or a store library or state management in general too much. If you can put it in the component because it leaves or it doesn't need to be used anywhere else, it's better to do it that way. You can also in Vue use composables to build other kind of patterns about data providers with inject provide behind the scenes, but that are just as good as state management. The state management is I really keep it for cases where the data is not limited to one component or is not limited to one page when you get to one page to another. And also things that are really used all over the place, or like when you have some business logic that is not really related to one page, it's related to multiple pages or multiple places in your application. So that's a bit more convenient to use. And also when you want to not only put the data itself, but also some logic like getters, which are computer properties, or actions, which are just function. So that logic business that is related to the data you're, or the state you're manipulating into one single place. So that will be one store. I think those are the only use cases I want to use the store and the state management for. I mean, not specifically the store. State management is so much more larger.
Right, right. That's fair. I guess it can be overused as well. I mean,
Yeah.
having the whole concept of business logic inside the store, I get it's like, to your point, you should only put there logic that deals with the data inside the store and nothing else. But yeah, I can see how people can overuse it and put too much logic in them. All right, so still referring, and you kind of hinted at it, but some libraries treat state as something that is immutable, something that doesn't change over time, and others treat it like a mutable piece of data. You went with one of those, so can you kind of elaborate pros and cons on each one, and maybe kind of explain why you decided for the one you went with?
Yeah, so Pinia is definitely mutable. It does accept state as mutable. This is just because Vue is that way as well. We have refs, reactive objects, and we mutate them in order to just trigger any changes on the page. We just let Vue do all the rendering, all the updates. We don't even need to worry about it. I think the state management being immutable uh, really depends on the libraries underneath, the front-end library like React, Svelte, Vue, Angular, etc., etc. I remember that it was in some cases a reason. It was sometimes the reason. I mean, sometimes the reason behind using immutable state management was performance. Some will say types as well, but not that much. And others will say that you get less bugs, probably because they get closer to a functional approach, I imagine, something like that. Also, well, it's very easy to put in yourself in the feed, right, with JavaScript, because objects are references. So you may end up pushing an object into two arrays, and then you modify one, and the other one is also updated, but that's not what you wanted. So immutable does remove that problem, while mutable
True.
has it. But sometimes you do want that connection between two objects to happen. So I prefer mutable because I'm used to it, I would say. And Vue 3 embraces mutable state. But I'm not really close to the immutable state. I've seen also the benefits in other cases, and it's pretty cool too.
All right, that's fair. So, like always, and like with every other library and framework out there are different ways of handling state. You kind of also mentioned it before. Pinia is not the only one. It might be like the de facto option, and even mentioned on the documentation as the one to choose if you want something complex. But you can also go with different patterns like the event bus and
Hmm.
sharing information through events within components, or the reactive function and making things data reactive and treat it kind of like state. Can you quickly tell us a little bit about those and what's the place where Pina shines? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so reactive or refs allows you to just composition API functions that allows you to create pieces of data that work with Vue seamlessly regarding the reactivity. So you're not limited to creating pieces of data inside components anymore. You can create them anywhere you want. Therefore, you can create your own state management solution from scratch with just these functions. The things you need to know is that you need to create them using fx scope, so they are not bound to a component lifecycle. They outlive a component, and you can use them as proper state management solutions. Regarding that, Pinia offers you the typing expressiveness, the server-side rendering, and the dev tools. So those are things that if you want to have, you will have to implement them yourselves, and you will end up building something similar to Pinia. It's not that much different from that. At the end, Pinia is not very opinionated itself. It just, within Vue, it's not very opinionated. It looks like a Vue component. Regarding the event bus pattern, that's, I would say, pretty different because it's more like event-driven behavior. You want to subscribe to some events in some components. Usually this event bus can be global or can be local to a subtree of your component tree. And so it doesn't, I wouldn't say it relates directly to state management itself. It relates more to component communication. And then you can use that for anything you want, of course. So Pinia in that regard is completely different to event bus. It doesn't try to handle the component-to-component communication. It tries to get closer to a data-driven approach where you have state that you can just change and let Vue handle all the complicated updating mechanism. Well, event bus, I would say it's rather more, it's more manual than that. So that's why I prefer to avoid event bus altogether if I can.
That's fair. No, absolutely. I mean, it always makes sense to go with the mature library that also has the dev tools and integration and so on. But clearly, sometimes it can be an overkill. So it might be maybe so. And I think you kind of hit a nail there. You said event bus is not really state; it's more like component communication, and maybe that's the confusion comes because sometimes people are or developers are trying to actually send data between components and they just go with state because that's the only thing they see that connects both places, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
That there might be like it might be subtle difference at times depending on your use case where you say, well, actually, if I use Pinia, then I can just store data and there and just like move it from one place to the other, and maybe that's not really state. You want something else, but you're using that because you don't know anything else.
Yeah.
If I want to get into using Pinia because I've never used it before, what are the core concepts I need to like pick up on, or what should I focus on? Because uh, from reading the documentation, it doesn't look like it's that complex. But am I missing something here?
Yeah, no, it's not that complex. Honestly, the library itself can be picked up in 1 hour. The core concepts are pretty much the same as Vue itself. We have state, which are just reactive data, getters, which are computed, and actions, which are just methods compared to components. To me, after that, what someone should be focusing on should be the reactivity itself from Vue. So it's not a content you will find on Pinia documentation. It's rather the content you find in VueJS documentation, and it's regarding the reactivity API and the composables, because you can use these composables with Pinia as well, and understanding how refs work how refs work together, how ref and wrapping works, all these kind of things, and how composables work, and building your own composables. This is the kind of knowledge that really helps to step up your game with the applications in general. And because Pinia is really bound to the state and how reactivity data works, it really helps you as well with Pinia.
Right, that makes sense. So I'm fairly new to Vue, to be honest. So I read something, and maybe it kind of relates to what you're saying now, but on the documentation, Pinia itself, you mentioned that there are kind of setup stores and option stores. Kind of what are the difference there? Is there like a recommended one, or which one should we pick?
There is not a recommendation. At the beginning, there were only the option stores, and so this was just to look like components, and because it was easier to structure. Because usually, one of the points of the composition API is to be able to structure things by business. So you can put data with functions, with computed all together, and then split your code by business. With the option API, you cannot do that. You have to split your code by type. The data was in one place, the methods are in another place, etc. So afterwards, we realized with Kia, which is the maintainer of UX, and the RFCs he was working on and I was helping with, that having something like a setup function in components, but in stores, was something beneficial because it gives you the flexibility of organizing things the way you want, having some kind of private data or functions, etc. So at the end, the option stores are just intuitive to build, are just easier. They're very easy to pick up because you have things split by type. So for the human brain, that's very easy to pick up as a concept. And that's also one of the reasons Vue was easy to pick up, is because we very often organize things by concepts in life. So having them in programming is also very easy. However, the setup stores do offer more flexibility, like calling a watcher within the store, something you cannot really do with the option store, or is a little bit more verbose and less intuitive to do. So I would say that most of the time option stores are just good enough. But if you want to go, if you need those extra things, you need to go beyond just state, computed, and functions. Then learning the plugin API and using setup stores is how to go up further. And so those are recommended for more advanced use cases, I would say.
Now, okay, so what kind of things can we do with the setup stores? You mentioned like watchers.
Yeah. So for example, you can have side effects running based on a data changing, like a fetching data, for example. So you don't need to have that watcher within a component because maybe you want that data to be fetched automatically globally. You can use composable in both. Actually, in option stores, you can put them inside the state, but it might feel more natural to do it in setup stores. And then it really is more about composing composables together, right? If a composable returns something and you want to pass that something to another composable, then in some scenarios, depending on what you get from the composables, the setup store might be your only option. For example, the option stores, they only allow you, the way you use composables within an option store, within the state, make it that you can only use composables that return state, which mean writable refs, writable reactive objects. But if a composable returns a function or a computer property, you won't be able to use that in the state because you're not able to put those pieces on the getters or the actions. However, on a setup store, you're not limited by that because you just have a function and you just return anything you want to expose. So if you have functions returned by a composable, you just return them in the store and they become actions. So that's something you cannot do with the option stores.
All right. So it's not a all right. So you go with the options if you're just starting out, or if you don't need anything too complex, and then you go to setups. Otherwise, cool.
Yeah,
Is this related to compose stores as well, or is this something else?
it does look a little bit like it because so composing store will be having one store that uses another, right? So you can split your business logic into multiple stores. So you create your graph of stores, so to say. So you can say this store relies on another existing store. It can also be seen as nesting, but it doesn't have to be. So it's similar in the way that a composable can use another composable inside of it. And at the end, when you define a store, you get a composable as well, right? So to use the store. So in that way, they are the same, yeah. But the reason you want to maybe build multiple stores and compose them together is just to split up the business logic in a more convenient way. So it's organization. If you want to use a store in different pages, then everything else just comes automatically, right? If you split a store into multiple stores, they are in different files, and then you use stores individually in different pages, then when you bundle your application, it's going to be code splitted, and you don't need to care or think about how your code is going to get code splitted. It will be automatic the way, depending on how you import things, right? So it does give you that flexibility without even having to think about it.
Right. I guess you would do that if you have like a very complex piece of state structure, right? I mean, you wouldn't do
Yeah.
this with basic key value pairs, but if you like have a complex like architecture for the whole state tree, then it will make sense to isolate that logic like you mentioned.
Yeah. Like sometimes you have some business logic that just keeps increasing in application because you keep adding new features. And maybe those features are only used on specific pages. Like you may start from a very basic, the cart. Yeah, when you buy things, right? You just have a simple cart, but then maybe depending on the pages you are on, you may want to add new features that are specific to pages. So you don't want to always build that in one single store. You could build another store that reuses the cart store, and then you import that new store and the cart store as well in other pages. And so you end up using only one store in the pages that only need the cart, and then the more advanced and the newer feature page use both stores.
Nice. All right. That gives you a lot of flexibility. Um, so, and this is now I'm just wondering here because I didn't see anything, or maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anything on the documentation about it. When it comes to storing the state, right, keeping it somewhere so that it's safe and reusable, is Pina using local storage, or where exactly is it storing the data? I'm just curious. I mean, I don't think it's that relevant, but I'm just wondering also if there is like any way or plan to add a way to support like third-party libraries and like storing that state somewhere else.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's the most asked question
Really?
in discussions and stuff, like how do you do local storage? And I don't know why, but there is some misconception. Maybe I think it's the wording of store and state management. And store, like just store being related to storing and local storage,
Right.
right? And so people think that local storage is an out-of-the-box feature for stores, but it really isn't at all. It's not related. Like a store, it's not about local storage. It's just that it's the same word,
Right.
store, because we have the data somewhere. So Pinia's state is stored in memory, which means that if you reload the page, you lose
You
the
lose
state.
everything. Right.
Now, yeah, it's very easy to add local storage. You have a plugin, or you can use even composables that have use local storage, and you just put that in state. It's one line change, and it gives you just persist the memory the state in from memory into the local storage or whatever you want to use, right? So there is no there won't be any feature within Pinia to support local storage because it's something that not everybody needs, and it's extremely easy and straightforward to add with composition API or plugins. And it also not forces, but guide users to better use the composition API and learn the benefits of it.
Nice. Well, I didn't know I was asking such a popular question, but yeah, I guess then maybe like the documentation might need a little update so everybody stops asking the same question. Anyway, something I'm getting out of this conversation is that if you want to write Vue, you have to know about composables because they're
Yeah.
everywhere. All right. Any Obviously this is always evolving, and I'm assuming that you've not stopped thinking about Pinia and you've not stopped um, planning new features. So do you have like any specific feature coming, maybe in the future, in a future release or far away, that you really can't wait for people to start using or trying?
I actually don't. To me, the API of Pinia is stable. I don't want it to get more complex. The idea is to have an API that is easy to pick up as well. So the improvements on Pinia are more going to be around tree shakeable options or development experience. So bug fixing with new releases of tools, updating to so these tools work, and just improving the DevTools experience, which do have like most of the feature requests um, I do think should be implemented, and I would support pull request and review pull request are for dev tools like Vue2 support, some kind of history travel. These are the kind of things that could be exciting to build for Pinia, but I haven't had the time to build. Um, to me, the main goal of Pinia was it's stable, and I don't think right now I haven't seen any feature that is worth adding, like big feature. And also, I want to keep Pinia small and tiny, right?
Nice. All right. That's I wasn't expecting that, but that's completely that makes absolute sense. So, all right. Finally, like leaving the really important questions to the end. What's up with the name? Why Pina?
The name. So the name, it's a short name first,
All
so
right.
that's important for an npm package. It's also, so it's a fruit, it's piña in Spanish. So I know we usually pick the French words, right? Ananas will be the French word for for piña.
Yeah.
The reason I picked piña is because the pineapple, it's a multifruit. So it when it grows as multiple flowers. If you search for time lapses, right, you can see it. So it's multiple flowers that grow, and so these flowers then give their fruit, and they fuse together into what we know as the pineapple. And so it's very interesting to see the time lapse, because you can really see the flowers blossom and just fuse together, and how it becomes just one thing, right? One multifruit. Like another example of multifruit is blackberries, I think. Yeah, blackberries. They are multifruits. They start as multiple flowers to become just one single fruit at the end.
Right.
And so these is very similar to stores, because in stores you build each store individually, but then they all come together. They are all connected through the Pinia instance. So you just have one big store, one brew store that connects everything together. So I thought it was pretty neat.
A multi-store. That's
Multi-store.
yeah. All right. Cool explanation. I thought you were just going to say, "Well, it's my favorite fruit," you know. So
Yeah.
I like your version better. All right. All right. That was it for Pina. We have now the mandatory quick round session where I ask every guest the same question. So, first question is, what's the best advice you ever received?
I think letting go of things is just very basic, right? But it does help a lot in life, in everything. Letting go of things that are not that important, like always putting things into perspective
Nice. All right.
and letting
Cool.
go.
Cool. Second question. What's the most exciting project you ever worked on?
For me, that's definitely the router. It's a very challenging project. It doesn't look that challenging from the outside, but it really is. And it's difficult to build something. It keeps offering new things to add. The APIs change, evolve a little bit, and building it from the ground up, understanding how different things like URL parsing, route parsing, um, the view, dynamic components. Yeah, there is a lot of challenge in it, so it's very exciting, a very exciting project that I still really like to work on.
Cool. Cool. Final question. What is one thing you wish you knew before you started coding that you eventually picked up over the years?
I wonder if there is something that I picked up over the years. I think that most of the time they come as realizations, things just, or they seem like realizations, right? Before I started coding, I think I wished I could have known that you could learn coding in a book, because I learned coding while reading other people's code, and it took me a year when I was a kid of just playing around with things. And it's a lot of time. You're a kid, so you have a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? But at the end, I see that you could read books, and I didn't know that back then. I mean, I didn't know you could learn coding when I was a kid in books. Pretty basic as well, but
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah. The kind of answers that we get from these questions are always so varied that. All right.
yeah.
That's it. Thank you so much for having the time for us and kind of sharing a bit of opinion. So, can you please share with the audience where they can find you if they want to know more about opinion or Vue in general?
Yeah, so you can find me around Twitter and GitHub as Posva, Posva. And on Discord sometimes as well. I keep an eye on the questions for Pinia routers. I can see the struggles and helps me build the next versions.
All right, cool. We'll add links to everything on the show notes. And that's it. Again, Eduardo, thank you so much for coming, for discussing Pinia, and for your time. And everyone listening, thank you for listening. See you in the next one. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't yet, take 10 seconds and leave a review of the show on your podcasting app. It will help us grow and reach more developers. And while you're at it, follow us on Twitter at the 20MinJS. This episode was brought to you by OpenReplay, an open source session replay platform for developers. Visit openreplay.com to know more. And I'll see you back here next week.